Hello everyone. In this video I will demonstrate how to use a repeater control in Visual Studio.net, and we will bind this against a Microsoft Access database. Now, to prepare for this example, I've already created a locally running website on my computer, and I've already added a Access database to the app data folder of the web application. To add the database, all I had to do was click on the app data folder. This folder is already created when I made the website. I right-clicked the folder and chose Add Existing Item. From there, I simply went to the folder structure on my computer and chose the Access database that I wish to rely on and clicked Add. That's already been accomplished in this case. So the next thing to do is to simply work with a brand new ASP.NET web page. In this case, we have the generic content created when you make one of these files. So at this point, the first action is to click the Design button. That makes it possible to easily drag a data bind control from the toolbox. If you notice here, the data controls are in their own special grouping in the toolbox. Repeater is a control that will bind to a data source and simply provide a way that you can completely customize the output of that data in a very quick fashion. So I'm dragging this control into my page. I now have a repeater. Visual Studio provides a repeater tasks wizard. I can choose the data source right here. So to get into that area, if I ever click away, let's say I click into the page, you simply hold your mouse over the control, click the little arrow, and the menu returns. Under Choose Data Source, there are none defined, so I'm going to click New Data Source, choose Access Database, and click OK. Now when I click Browse, I see the path for my website, and I can select the database that's already been placed in the app data folder. So now when I click Next, that database is inspected by Studio, and it finds all of the tables and predefined queries which are available. In a large database such as SQL Server or Oracle, these queries would be known as views. So we're going to work with one called Alphabetic List of Products, and I'm going to choose the product ID, product name, and units in stock columns. Now I could get much more advanced here. I could create a where criteria and only return matching rows. Or I could associate an input parameter from the page itself and bind to that data so that the data you see depends on what someone might choose on a drop-down list. Those features are a bit more advanced than we're aiming for. Right now we just want to see data appear in this repeater control. So my next action is to click the Next button, and I can test my query and we can see that it works. And you can see the select statement in the summary area where the statement is simply select and then the three column names from the query. And what the brackets offer is they signify to the query that the object inside the brackets refers to a query or table. The space characters can provide some problems otherwise. So the next thing I'll do is click Finish. So now we have a data source, but we don't have a way to see that data in the page. If I were to browse my page, View in Browser, we can see how the repeater control doesn't really render anything. And when we go to View Source, you see nothing in the page. So it's really up to us to define how this control will function. To do so, as it says in the control, switch to Source View to edit the templates, we click Source. And all we see defined is the ASP repeater control. We see that it's defined with a data source ID of Access Data Source 1. And then that data source is a separate web control. It's not a web control you'd ever see in the user's page, but it's a web control that runs on the server. And it controls access to that Access database. Right here we see where the data file is located. We see the select command for how to retrieve the data. And that data source is what's powering our repeater control. So now it's necessary for us to define how the data will be rendered in the page. To do so, I simply want to insert a template, and this is where I click the first character of the template name, the less than, and it gives me several choices. I can vary the color from row to row, I can display a meaningful footer of information, I can display a header, which is what I want to do. So I'm going to have a header template, and beneath that I need to define an item template. This is where my actual rows of data will appear. we still don't have enough here to actually see content in our page. That's because the repeater control completely depends on the developer to create the structure of the web page. For our example, I'm going to create an HTML table. And the way I do this is very simple. I simply create the table as I would any other HTML table, but I create it before and after the repeater control tags, because the repeater control itself is going to reside within our table structure, because it's going to be responsible for generating the table's rows dynamically. So within the header template, I create a table row tag, and within the item template, I also create a table row tag. And then in the header is where I can define the actual header columns, which I know to be product ID, product name, and units in stock. So I'm going to cheat a little, and I'm going to copy that text right into my header area, and then I'm going to put each on its own line, and then I'm going to actually create what's called a table head cell in HTML around each item. So as you can see here, I'm just taking some shortcuts for the sake of time on the video, but I'm creating some simple table head elements. So anyone who's comfortable with HTML tables, it's just a matter of knowing how to intersperse those tags with the repeater itself to build up some dynamic content that will generate and show the data. So now what I'm going to do is run the page again. As you can see, I have a header template with a row and item templates with rows, but we don't have any data defined in the item template. So what happens? Well, we browse this page. We have columns. If we do a view source, you can see that we have a simple table, no data. But you can see that it actually made a row for each of the items in the table. So it's trying to do what it's told. It's just we haven't explained to it how to show the data yet. So in the item template itself, within the table row that I added earlier, I'm going to create some table cells. And I'm going to create one for each of the columns. Now is when things get a little trickier. Now, as you can see above, I've kept the actual literal names of the columns. I haven't added spaces or anything, and that's for a reason. That's so that I can refer to that information when referencing the data elements. Now, to create a data reference, you need to have special syntax. You have less than %, and then a # character. And as you can see, Studio created the closing tags for me. And here's where I have to type eval, E-V-A-L, and then in parentheses and in quotes, the column name. So we just defined that the product ID column should populate the first cell. So I'm going to view my page one more time. And sure enough, the first column is populating. And when I go to the view source on the page, you can see that the first cell has that value and the others don't. So the next item for us is, and again I'll use a shortcut, is to populate the remaining cells. Another thing I hope you can gather from this is that I test frequently. I don't create the entire page or the entire control and then test. I do it step by step. That way if I encounter a problem, it's easier to determine what the source of that problem is. Now when I view the page, we have all three columns, and when we choose a view source, we can see the data is displayed as intended. Now again, the main advantage of a repeater control over something like a grid view control is that the content renders really quickly in the browser. There's a lot less overhead on the server side. The drawback being, of course, that we need to define all of the data elements in terms of the HTML structure and the eval statements for showing those elements. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and that you find it helpful. Thanks.